Live, we're live, folks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Watch your dirty stories.
Thank you.
Okay, it is 6 p.m. I'd like to call this public hearing to order. This is the public hearing, which is being hosted by the planning board. The public hearing is on proposed amendments to the town of Lincolnville land use ordinance seeking to change section 18 of the commercial site plan review. I'd like to ask the town administrator whether all legal requirements have been met in order to hold this public hearing.
The simple answer is yes, but the state statute requires posting in the municipal office at least 13 days before the public hearing. The notice was posted on the public bulletin board on February 27th. Statute also requires that it be published in the newspaper at least twice in the area of general circulation. The first publication must be at least 12 days before the hearing. That first publication ad was on March 5th. Second publication must be at least 7 days before the hearing. That publication date was March 12th. And we had a bonus publication date of March 19th. So the answer to your question is yes.
Thank you, sir. Doesn't look like we have a huge outcry here, or rather a huge audience. So I'm going to miss half of what I was going to say. Mr. Matt Eddy will present for the Mid-Coast Council of Governments, the land use site change proposals. And Mr. Eddy, if you would like to start, the only thing I would like to add is we'd like to let Mr. Eddy continue through to the presentation, finish it, and then if we have questions or comments, we can do after that. Please proceed. Thank you.
So we were contracted with the community to develop a site plan review ordinance. It followed the establishment of the community's moratorium that was in response to a dollar store that was being proposed. We sat down with the land use committee, which was the body that was charged with looking at site plan review ordinance. We did a review of different approaches on how to deal with box stores, which was really the small box store that we were addressing. And we looked at options that ran from restricting the size of retail stores to really upgrading the site plan review, and the planning board, land use commission ended up really kind of focusing on the site plan review option. And that's what we have here today. I'm going to pretend to put my glasses on. There. Oh, that's.
See a lot of the weird glasses.
It hasn't had that happen in a long time. We went through both revision process and really the standards of the site plan review ordinance. In the revision process, we clarified the administration, the interpretation of the site plan review, and the enforcement roles. We clarified the pre-application process, including the identification of waivers and guidance role in the stage of review for the planning board to play. We required pre-application for major site plan review applications. We clarified the planning board's right to procure third-party reviews at the expense of the applicant. The previous ordinance wasn't clear about that. We reorganized the chapters by collapsing 13 into 11, the standards and criteria, and 12, the building design impact standards. We permitted waivers from the submission process for minor site plan review, but they would have to go to a pre-application and request those waivers. And we clarified improvement guarantees and how they worked. We spent a good deal of time on the revisions for the standards. You know, there's a statement in the beginning of the standards section that talked about the fact that Lincolnville really doesn't have a zoning ordinance, so it's a mixture of uses. Any use really can occur anywhere in the community, and that the goal of the site plan review ordinance was to protect the neighbors from activities that would go on around. So we looked at some specific standards, clarified the delivery locations and screening, which really kind of came out of the dollar store discussion. Clarified parking in the rear, internal circulation, and other site parking. We expanded and clarified the standards for parking lot landscaping and gave them 4 options. You remember we walked through those. We added some ADA compliance, the American Disabilities Act accessibility standard compliance. We modified the storm water management requirements. We included the use of green technology wherever possible, and where they have to do a design that they focus on at least the 100-year storm as a baseline. The old ordinance, I think, was 25, if any. And we increased design protection for nearby wetlands and water bodies, because it really, that's what's special about Lincolnville, is the different water bodies and watersheds that exist here. We expanded the building design standards to reflect that the community has a limited zoning ordinance districts permitting a variety of uses. We established standards that were meant to ensure that those uses could coexist. We talked about preserving the village nature of Lincolnville, and we focused the contrasts in that site design on neighborhood characteristics. And really through the input of the planning board, we really refined that to talk about neighborhoods specifically in the review process. We developed general design guidelines for structures focused on blending with the neighborhood and building location orientation consistent with neighborhood layout. And then finally, we presented some information and guidance on building materials and blending with the adjacent neighborhood, new requirements for exterior lighting and a reduction of night sky impact. We introduced standard for vibration, odors, and noise. We limited the addition of drive-throughs other than gas station, and we reorganized the existing view shed protection ordinance that you had into something that kind of made a little bit of sense, and that was it. Spent a lot of time doing that, but and there was a lot of discussion and debate. We met with the planning board, I believe it was at least 2, if not 3 times, and 2, I think 2, and listened to your input, and then arrived at a standard set of standards that the Land Use Commission could agree to. I can stop there.
That's it. That was quick. Well, first I'd just like to clarify one point personally. You said that drive-through issues were limited, drive-through possibilities, but I thought they were prohibited except for gas stations.
They are. That's correct statement. They're prohibited except for gas stations.
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason I asked that, I wonder if Lower Bay will get a bank.
That was a discussion that the board had, and they recognized, we talked about it, they recognized that not allowing drive-throughs would probably limit bank activity.
Okay. I'd like to see if any of the board members have any comments. Suggestions that they would like to pass on to Mr. Eddy.
First, Sandy Dow. I think an excellent job, guys. I had a few notes, but all minor. One is basically a lot of it's very subjective, but there's outlets. The planning board can go ahead and say that's okay. And that pretty much covers anything that's concerned with. In terms of materials, you say high quality without a definition. And somewhere in there, you get some percentages. 65% and 15% or something like that. Percentages are tough to measure. How do you measure? Is it 65% or is it 67%? And is there a problem if it is? Was the thought that I was thinking. I was also thinking maybe wording like the preponderance of it should be this, that, or whatever instead of the firm percentage. So I'm sorry. Yeah, there were two of them with a percentage. I had them on the computer. I went to print it out. My printers could put it this morning. So
Page 30. Page 30.
Golf course, page 29, like, end up there.
The 65%, we talked about, I don't remember exactly the distinction why we arrived at 65%. The goal was to not have any one material dominate the structure. And I think they looked at some examples. I think we arrived at 65%. But the review process, tasks the applicant to really provide you that information. And help you with that.
not a big deal, as I said.
Yeah.
It jumped out at me. And the only other one I had was in terms of landscaping. Put trees in, you put this in, you put that in. 5 years from now, is there any maintenance requirements on any of that? Don't even know if that fits in this scheme of things.
There are communities that, if they're concerned about it, will ask for a maintenance requirement, and will make it a condition of the approval.
Well, I'm not concerned about anything landscaping. I'm paying his land, but that jumped out at. Other than that, the job is quite clear. It's the neighborhood thing is so subjective that, if our client didn't agree with our decision on it,
Anyone else?
I'm happy.
I'd just like to point or tell you what I think about it in terms of the complexity of it. I think, unfortunately, it places a really strong burden on the planning board. It makes it very difficult for us to. We're not specialists. It's almost like some of us would have to have an architect on here to be able to differentiate some of the things that we're requiring the public or an applicant to come up with. So that was my comment. And the other question I have for you is, if this ordinance were in effect in 2023, would it have kept out Dollar General store?
If they wanted to meet the requirements of the site plan review, they could have located. The question is, would they be willing to do that? And the answer is, generally speaking, dollar stores would. They would not enter into a review process where they were required to meet these kind of neighborhood standards.
Not to interrupt. I look, you're putting the planning board in a position of, whatever. I looked at that as putting Frank or whoever in a position of policing. Determining what it is, not necessarily you and I. But you're gonna.
Well, with that, maybe I would like to suggest that we listen, hear from the CEO if he has any comments on it. Or questions.
Well, just the big picture is, if you take the whole change, and Matt, you did a good job. With your focus. But the big picture is that what these changes do, and I have spoken this the first meeting ahead, this creates another degree of another layer of granularity that you have to go through that you didn't have to go through before. Just a simple one on there with the identification of glass mixed with rocks mixed with so. If you have that before you right now, how are you going to say yes or no on it? How are you going to make that delineation? I mean,
Well, it's subjective, is my question.
okay, so, and the other thing is, I'm not concerned about measuring your waste, your stormwater for pollutants. I don't think that's something that, how you're going to measure stormwater for pollutants. Okay, think about the engineering that would be required to accomplish it. How are you going to prove that? So I guess the main thing I'm getting at is the additional pressure that's put on you. Two of these areas I've identified as the building materials I said are excessive and subjective. And then I also mentioned on one of the other areas on the design guidelines, I also identified, and that's a whole page as excessive and restrictive. And and that says, well, obviously, if you don't know the answers of the planning board, it gives you the subjective. So if it's subjective, it can be anything. Well, that's my feeling.
Well, but they did give the planning board the authority to ask for or to require expert analysis of the application to see whether or not it doesn't. So we do have that to fall back on.
Have they already had the authority there?
Well, but it was a little bit difficult as to who was going to pay for it. It wasn't quite
No,
clear.
it's identified that if the planning board says, I do not, for example, if you take the phosphorus migration, we are not qualified for phosphorus measurement.
Yeah.
So therefore, the planning board has the authority to say you will have a professional certified phosphorus measurement taken that would be acceptable to the state level, not your level. The state level. So you have that already.
No, I know we already had it, but I thought it was clarified a little bit.
It was.
Whatever you want to say.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Clifton Laughlin, Land Use Committee. This microphone, okay?
Please.
I went over 12.4 because I knew this was a point of confusion. And first of all, I'd like to,
What page are you on?
this is probably not.
Page 29.
Thank you. Okay.
First thing you have to do is go down to C. And realize that this only applies to facade right of way. So that throws a lot of that out. If you can't see it from the right of way, it doesn't really count. And then the materials that are allowed to be used in denotes them brick, architectural glass, wood, comparable composite materials and metal. So that gives a lot of choices there. And it's pretty clear that that one facade, if you can put one of those materials up to 65%. But you can't go to 70%. So what you have to do is either change the color of that material, or use one of the other denoted materials for the other 35%. So as an applicant, that would be pretty clear to me how I would design that facade. It really doesn't confuse me that much. And then it even allowed you to cover more than 15% of that facade with a material that's not listed, if everybody's in agreement. And then, of course, there's 10.1, where during the application process, the planning board and the applicant may decide that they might waive anything during the process of review. So if something is a problem for anybody, you could certainly waive that requirement altogether. Thank you. And, yeah, some of it's ambiguous, but if you look at what we have right now, the ordinance that we have in force right now, some of the landscaping is just as ambiguous, even more than that. So the building shows being in a good position is basically what it says. So there's other standing ordinances that are written that way too.
Well, we recognize that an enormous amount of work has gone into it, and you've done a very, very good job. Anyone else have any comments? And the public, hearing is closed at this point, and unless we have anything else, could I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? We're done.
Thank you very much. Yeah, a lot of work on it, but
It did, we did.